$1. A story of grace and redemption. The very first thing she became aware of was laughter. Not the warm, welcoming kind that fills a room with joy. This was the sharp, cutting kind. The cruel sort that people produce when they believe someone beneath them has somehow earned it. Grace Holloway knelt in the frozen mud, her wrists loosely bound together, the bitter cold already seeping through her thin dress and settling deep into her bones. Somewhere close by, boots scraped against the ground. Coins clinked. Men murmured among themselves. She couldn't make out a single face, but every word reached her with perfect clarity. "Look at her," one man said with a chuckle. "Blind as a cave bat. Can't be worth much, can she?" Another voice answered, louder this time. "Come now, gentlemen. Who'll start the bidding?" Grace lowered her head. The burlap sack pulled over her face smelled of grain and old dust. Her breathing stayed slow and measured, though her chest trembled with every inhale. 23 years old, blind since the age of 7, and today she was being auctioned off to the highest bidder. "Step forward, girl." A shove from behind nearly sent her sprawling. She caught herself just in time and stumbled up onto what felt like a wooden crate. The wind swept across the open square and cut against her exposed skin like a blade. Grace held herself perfectly still. She had learned that lesson the hard way, long ago. Move too quickly and someone hits you. Move too slowly and someone hits you harder. "All right, boys." The auctioneer's voice boomed out across the crowd. Grace recognized it immediately. Marcus Wilder, the owner of the saloon where she had scrubbed floors for 3 long years. The same man who had kept her sleeping in a storage closet barely larger than a coffin. "What we have here is a fine little bargain," Wilder announced. "Young woman, healthy enough. Blind, sure, but that just means she won't see what's coming." Laughter erupted from the crowd. Grace's stomach twisted, but she remained silent. "What's wrong with her eyes?" someone asked. "Fever when she was a child," Wilder replied. "It took her sight along with the rest of her, but everything else works just fine." More laughter rippled through the square. Grace curled her toes against the splintered wood beneath her feet. "How much?" a man called out. Wilder clapped his hands together. "Let's open at $5. Silence fell over the square. A cold wind swept through. "All right then, 4. Nothing. Boots shifted. Someone spat into the dirt. 3. Wilder tried. Still nothing. Grace felt something heavier than fear settle into her chest. Shame. That slow, suffocating certainty she had carried her whole life. Worthless, a burden, broken. $2, Wilder barked. Still not a word. Then his voice dropped, flat and irritated. $1. $1 damn dollar, he snapped. Final offer. Grace held her breath. For a moment, the entire world seemed to come to a standstill. Then, clink. A single silver coin struck the frozen ground. The sound rang out sharp and clear like a gunshot. The crowd went dead silent. Wilder let out a slow chuckle. "Well now, looks like we've got ourselves a buyer." Something in the air shifted. Men stepped aside. Boots moved away from the center of the square. Someone of consequence had just walked forward. Grace could feel it. Heavy footsteps approached her. Steady, unhurried, certain. They stopped directly in front of her. A rough hand lifted her chin gently, not grabbing, not forcing, simply guiding her face upward. Grace braced herself. "You're mine now," she whispered under her breath, but the voice that answered was quiet, deep, and tired in a way she somehow understood without explanation. "No, ma'am." The rope around her wrists began to loosen. "You're free." Grace went completely still. For a long moment she neither moved nor breathed. The words hung in the cold air between them. Free. No one had ever said that word to her before. The man's hands worked slowly at her wrists. The rope loosened further, then slipped away entirely. Blood rushed back into her fingers with a sharp, painful sting. "There," he said quietly. "That's better." Grace rubbed her wrists, unsure what to do with hands that were no longer tied. "Can you stand on your own?" the stranger asked. "I'm standing," she replied softly. "I mean without the ropes holding you." She hesitated. "I think so." "Good." The burlap sack brushed against her cheek as he carefully lifted it from her head. Cold winter air flooded across her face. Grace blinked out of habit. The darkness remained, just as it always did. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Grace," she said after a pause. "Grace Holloway." He repeated it slowly, as though weighing the sound of it. "Grace." Then he added, "Name's Wyatt Carter." She waited for what came next. The commands, the conditions, the rules of whatever new life she had just been sold into. But none came. Instead, Wyatt said something else entirely. "You're freezing." Before she could respond, something heavy and warm settled across her shoulders. A coat, thick, smelling faintly of leather, wood smoke, and pine. Grace's fingers clutched the fabric without thinking. "No one's ever given me—" She stopped herself. Wyatt didn't ask what she meant. "We're going to walk," he said calmly. "About 20 paces. There's a horse waiting." Grace nodded. "Can you ride?" "I've never tried." "That's all right," he said. "I'll help you." He didn't grab her arm or shove her forward. He simply stepped up beside her and started walking. His boots hit the frozen ground in a slow, steady rhythm. Grace followed the sound. Step, step, step. Behind them, the crowd was already breaking apart. The entertainment was over. Just another girl sold for less than the price of a meal. They walked past the edge of the square and into quieter streets. Grace counted steps under her breath. 20, then 20 more. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Carter, just Wyatt." She swallowed. "Why did you buy me?" He didn't answer right away. She heard the soft snort of a horse nearby and the creak of leather reins. When Wyatt finally spoke, his voice was even. Because nobody else should have had the chance. He lifted her carefully into the saddle. She felt his hands steady her. Then his weight settled behind her as he mounted. His arms came to rest on either side as he took the reins. The horse moved forward. The ride stretched on in silence. Wind brushed against her cheeks. Snow crunched beneath the hooves. Grace lost track of how much time had passed. Eventually the horse slowed. Wood creaked somewhere ahead. "A gate." "We're here," Wyatt said. He helped her down with steady hands. "Where is here?" she asked. "My place," he answered simply. She heard a door swing open. Warm air spilled out, carrying the smell of burning firewood and something cooking on a stove. Wyatt guided her forward. 3 steps up, he said. Wide porch, door straight ahead. Grace climbed slowly. Her fingers found the wooden door frame. "Go on," he said from behind her. She pushed it open. Heat wrapped around her like an embrace. For the first time in years, Grace felt her shoulders relax. "There's a chair to your left," Wyatt said. "Sit down if you like. I'll get you something to eat." She found the chair and lowered herself carefully. From across the room came the sound of a pot being lifted, a spoon stirring, liquid poured into a bowl. Then Wyatt returned. "Here," he said, placing the bowl gently into her hands. "Careful. It's hot." Grace wrapped her fingers around the warmth. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Why?" Wyatt paused. "Why what? The coat? The soup? Not hurting you?" Silence stretched between them. Then Wyatt spoke quietly. "Drink your soup first." Grace took a slow sip. It was warm, thick, real food, better than anything she had tasted in years. She set the bowl down carefully. "I need to know," she said softly, "what you want from me." Across the room, Wyatt shifted in his chair. "I don't want anything from you." Grace frowned. "Then why bring me here?" Wyatt's voice dropped lower. "I was in town for supplies. Saw the crowd." He paused. "Saw what they were doing to you." Another pause. "And I remembered what it felt like to be treated like you weren't human." Grace's breath caught. "You were a soldier once." The fire crackled softly in the hearth. "The war ended a long time ago. Wyatt continued. But some things stay with you. Grace swallowed. So you bought me. I paid $1, he said. So nobody else could. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been sitting heavy in her chest since the auction. What happens now? Wyatt leaned back in his chair. Now, he said, you rest. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we figure out what you want. Grace frowned. You're letting me leave? His voice was calm. You're not my prisoner, Grace. A strange feeling cracked open inside her chest. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. And that frightened her more than anything else ever had. Grace sat quietly beside the fire. The warmth from the soup had spread through her chest, but her mind refused to settle. The cabin was silent except for the gentle crackling of burning wood and the steady, even breathing of the man sitting across the room. Finally, she spoke again. I don't have anywhere to go. Wyatt didn't answer right away. No family, Grace continued softly. No money. No one who would take me in. Another quiet moment passed. Then Wyatt said, Then stay. Grace turned her head toward his voice. For how long? As long as you need. That's not how this works, she said. People don't just... I'm not people. The way he said it made her pause. Who are you? She asked. Wyatt didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a rougher edge. Someone who knows what it's like to lose everything. The fire popped. Grace listened carefully, the way she always did. People revealed the truth in small sounds, the way their voice caught, the way they breathed between words. Wyatt continued, My wife and son died 8 years ago. Grace's hands tightened on the edge of the chair. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be. His chair creaked as he shifted. House fire, he said. Winter of '71. He paused. My boy's name was Daniel. He was 4. Grace lowered her head. And your wife? Mary. Silence filled the room again. I'm not telling you that for your pity, Wyatt added, just explaining why I don't talk much. Grace nodded slowly. I understand that. Yes, she said. I think you do. She turned slightly toward him. People think silence means weakness, she said, but sometimes it just means someone has survived too much. Wyatt gave a quiet grunt that might have been agreement. The days that followed felt strange to her. Grace had been bracing herself for rules, orders, punishments. Instead, Wyatt gave her something she had never once been given before. Space. On the second morning, he walked her through the cabin. 12 steps from the bed to the stove, he explained. 3 steps from the table to the door. Grace counted carefully under her breath. You'll feel a raised floorboard under your foot on step 7, Wyatt said. That's your marker. She stopped walking. You counted the floorboards last night. While you were sleeping, he replied. Figured it might help. Grace didn't know what to say to that. He showed her where the water bucket sat, where the wood was stacked, where the kettle rested on the stove. Careful, he said once as she reached toward the fire. Feel the heat before you touch. By the 4th day, Grace made her first cup of tea entirely on her own. You're good at this, she said, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Good at what? Teaching. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Had practice. With who? The silence that followed told her everything. I'm sorry, she said quickly. You don't need to be, he replied. Grace took a slow sip of tea. It's strange, she admitted. What is? You don't treat me like I'm broken. That's because you're not. Grace let out a small laugh. Most people would disagree. Most people are fools. The word startled her. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had defended her like that, without hesitation, without qualification. Later that evening, a storm rolled in. Wind slammed against the cabin walls while snow hissed across the roof. Grace sat wrapped in a blanket near the fire. Wyatt checked the door latch. It'll hold, he said. I know, Grace replied. You can hear it? I hear everything. Wyatt sat down across from her. That's not a weakness, he said quietly. Grace turned her head toward him. What do you mean? You notice things most people miss, Wyatt said. Voices, footsteps, lies. He paused. That's not blindness, Grace. That's a gift. No one had ever called her blindness a gift before. She felt her throat tighten. You don't pity me, she said. No. Why not? Wyatt answered without hesitation. Because pity is for people who've given up. Grace's voice came out barely above a whisper. What if I can't find a reason to keep going? Wyatt leaned forward slightly. Then I'll walk beside you until you do. The storm raged outside, but inside that small cabin for the first time in years, Grace Holloway felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Safety. And somewhere deep inside her chest, the first quiet spark of trust. On the sixth night, the storm finally broke. The wind softened to a low whistle against the cabin walls. Snow slid quietly from the roof. Grace sat near the fire, her blanket pulled around her shoulders, listening to the quiet settle in over the hills. Wyatt moved near the door, checking the latch one last time. It's holding, he said. I know, Grace answered. You can hear it? I can hear most things. Wyatt crossed the room and lowered himself into the chair across from her. The wood creaked beneath his weight. You hear a lot, he said. It's all I've got. That's not true. Grace turned her face toward him. What do you mean? You've got your mind, Wyatt said. Your memory. The way you piece sounds together like parts of a puzzle. He paused. That's not nothing, Grace. She let out a quiet breath. Most people think I'm broken. Most people are fools. Wyatt replied again. Grace laughed softly. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time laughter had come so easily. You don't pity me, she said after a moment. No. Why? Wyatt shifted in his chair. Because pity is for people who've given up. Grace ran her fingers slowly along the edge of her blanket. How do you know I haven't? You're still breathing, Wyatt said. Still fighting, still asking questions. He leaned back. That's not someone who's given up. Grace swallowed. What if I can't find a reason to keep going? The fire cracked between them. Wyatt's voice lowered. Then I'll walk beside you until you do. Grace felt that strange warmth again, spreading through her chest. Before she could respond, hooves thundered outside, fast, more than one horse. Grace's head snapped toward the door. Wyatt! He was already on his feet. Stay here, he said sharply. The door swung open. Cold air rushed in. Grace heard boots hit the porch. Several sets. Well now, a smooth voice called out. Look at this cozy little setup. Grace felt her stomach drop. She knew that voice. Marcus Wilder. Morning, Carter, Wilder said lazily. Hear you've been playing house with my property. Wyatt's voice went hard. She's not your property. A rustle of paper. That's where you're wrong, Wilder replied. Got the bill of sale right here, signed and stamped. That auction wasn't legal. Legal enough, Wilder said. Judge signed off. Sheriff doesn't care. Grace's hands began to tremble. And I brought company, Wilder added. 3 men outside who'll swear that girl belongs to me. What do you want? Wyatt asked. The girl, Wilder answered simply. Grace stood up. I didn't see anything, she said quickly. Wilder laughed. No, he said, but you heard plenty. Her heart stopped. Back at the saloon, Wilder continued slowly. The night Clarence Miller died. Grace's breath caught. 3 weeks ago, the drunk who had fallen down the saloon stairs. Everyone had called it an accident, but Grace had heard the truth. She had heard the shove, heard the sickening crack when Miller's body struck the bottom step, and she had heard Wilder murmur to his men, "That's what happens to men who don't know when to shut up." Wyatt spoke again. She doesn't know anything. Maybe, Wilder said. His boots stepped up onto the porch. Maybe not, but I'm not taking chances. The boards creaked under his weight. "Hand her over nice and easy," Wilder said, "and maybe nobody gets hurt." Grace's hands trembled. Outside, the wind howled across the hills. Inside the cabin, silence stretched tight as a drawn bowstring. Then came a sharp metallic sound, the unmistakable click of a revolver being cocked. "Don't be stupid, Carter," Wilder warned. "You're one man." Grace heard Wyatt's calm reply, "Then I'll take 3 with me." A long, heavy silence followed. Finally, Wilder spoke again, his voice colder now. "We'll be back tomorrow." Boots retreated from the porch, and next time, horses shifted outside, I won't ask nicely. Moments later, hooves thundered down the trail and faded into the distance. The cabin fell silent again. Grace's knees buckled. She grabbed the wall to steady herself. "Wyatt." Her voice shook. "He knows." "Yes." "What do we do?" Wyatt didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had the steadiness of a man who had already made up his mind. "We don't run." Grace swallowed hard. "Then what?" Wyatt stepped closer. "We fight." Grace stood in the center of the cabin, her hands still trembling. "Fight? How?" Wyatt walked slowly across the floor, his steps unhurried. "By finding the one thing Wilder is truly afraid of." Grace frowned. "And what's that?" "The truth." He stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. "You heard what happened that night in the saloon?" Wyatt said. "You are the only witness." Grace shook her head. "But I can't prove anything." "You don't have to prove it," Wyatt replied. "You just have to tell the right people." "And if there aren't any right people?" Wyatt's voice hardened. "Then we make some." Grace leaned against the table, steadying her breathing. "Tell me what you remember," Wyatt said. She closed her eyes. Though darkness was nothing new to her. "It was late," she began. "Past midnight. Past." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "I was in the back room sorting bottles. Wilder didn't know I was still there." "Who else was in the saloon?" Wyatt asked. "Clarence Miller," she said. "He'd been drinking all night. Loud. Angry." "What was he angry about?" "Money," Grace said. "A land deal." She tilted her head, the sounds coming back to her clearly. "Miller kept saying Wilder had cheated him, said he'd go to the marshal in the morning." Wyatt didn't interrupt. Grace continued. They moved toward the stairs. Miller was shouting. Wilder was quiet. Her voice grew softer, too quiet. She pressed her hands together. Then I heard a shove. The memory made her stomach twist. Miller screamed. Grace took a slow breath. I heard him fall, step by step, his body hitting every stair. The cabin was silent except for the fire. "And then?" Wyatt asked gently. "Nothing." Grace's voice shook. For a few seconds, everything went still. She lifted her head. Then Wilder called for his men. "What did he say?" Grace didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, "He told them." Miller slipped. Her jaw tightened. "But that's not what he said after they carried the body out." Wyatt leaned in closer. "What did he say?" Grace repeated the words exactly as she had heard them that night. "That's what happens to men who don't know when to shut up." The fire cracked loudly between them. Wyatt exhaled slowly. "Did anyone else hear it?" Grace hesitated. "Yes." Wyatt straightened. "Who?" "A woman." "What woman?" "One of the girls who worked upstairs," Grace said. "I heard her gasp when Miller fell." "You know her name?" "No." Grace shook her head. But she was there. Wyatt began pacing. "If there's another witness, that changes everything." Grace frowned. "She won't talk." "Why not?" "Because Wilder owns those girls," Grace said quietly. "They're terrified of him." Wyatt stopped pacing. "Fear can change," he said. "How?" "When the right person asks the right questions." Grace shook her head. "You don't understand. Wilder doesn't just own the saloon." She lowered her voice. "He owns half the town. The store, the stables, the boarding house. Anyone who speaks against him loses everything." Wyatt was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Not everyone. Grace turned her head toward him. There's a woman in this town, Wyatt said. Margaret Hale. What about her? She runs a dress shop near the edge of Dodge. Grace listened carefully. 5 years ago, Wilder's men killed her husband. Grace's breath caught. Everyone called it an accident. Wyatt's voice dropped. But Margaret knows the truth. Grace considered that. Will she help us? Only one way to find out. Grace straightened slowly. When do we go? Tomorrow morning, Wyatt said. And if Wilder's men come back tonight? The cabin grew very quiet. Wyatt's answer came low and calm. Then they'll learn something. Grace waited. What? What happens when you corner a man who has nothing left to lose? Outside the cabin, the wind rose again, and somewhere far down the trail, a horse whinnied in the dark. The night passed slowly. Grace slept in short, restless stretches beside the fire. Every sound pulled her back to wakefulness. The creak of wood, the whisper of wind through the trees, the soft shift of Wyatt's boots as he moved quietly through the cabin. He didn't sleep at all. She could hear it in the way he moved. Sometime before dawn, he sat down across from her. You should try to rest, he said softly. Grace shook her head. I can't. Why? She swallowed. Every time I close my eyes, I hear him falling. Wyatt didn't ask who. He knew. Does it ever stop? Grace asked quietly. The sounds in your head? Wyatt drew a slow breath. No. Grace lowered her head. Then how do you live with it? You don't, Wyatt said. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? You live around it, he said. You build something new on top of the wreckage. Grace sat with those words for a long moment. Is that what this is? She asked. What? This cabin. Living out here alone. Wyatt hesitated. It was. And now? Now things are different. Grace waited for him to say more. He didn't. After a while, she spoke again. Wyatt? Yeah. Why me? He shifted in his chair. What do you mean? You could have walked right past that auction, Grace said. No one would have blamed you. Wyatt exhaled slowly. I would have blamed myself. That's not an answer. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, his voice came out low and rough. When my wife died, I wasn't there. Grace lifted her head. I was 2 towns away chasing a bounty, he continued. Something that didn't matter. The words came slowly. By the time I got back, the house was gone. Grace felt her chest tighten. I spent years telling myself there was nothing I could have done, Wyatt said. He paused. But I never believed it. Silence filled the room. So when I saw you standing on that auction block, Grace held her breath. I thought if I walk away from this... His voice broke slightly. I'm no different from the man who let his family burn. Tears slid down Grace's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I'm not your redemption, Wyatt, she whispered. I know. Then what am I? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had steadied again. A second chance. Grace reached out slowly in the darkness. Her hand found his sleeve. He didn't pull away. They sat like that together until pale morning light crept through the windows. The ride into town took most of the morning. Grace sat in front of Wyatt on the horse, his arm wrapped around her to keep her steady. Snow crunched beneath the hooves as they followed the narrow road toward Dodge City. She had stopped asking where they were going. She trusted him now. That realization frightened her more than Wilder ever had. We're close, Wyatt said finally. Margaret Hale's shop is just ahead. The horse slowed. Wyatt helped her down carefully. 3 wooden steps creaked beneath Grace's boots as he guided her toward the door. The smell hit her first. Fabric, lavender, fresh coffee. We're closed, a sharp woman's voice called from inside. Wyatt pushed the door open. Margaret, he said. A pause. Well, I'll be, the woman replied. Wyatt Carter. Grace heard footsteps approaching. And who's the girl? Margaret asked. Her name's Grace, Wyatt said. She needs your help. The footsteps stopped right in front of her. "She's blind," Margaret said quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Grace answered softly. "Don't call me ma'am," the woman said. "Makes me feel older than I am." Grace almost smiled. Margaret walked slowly around her. "What kind of help are we talking about?" Wyatt's voice was blunt. "The kind that might get you killed." Margaret laughed. It wasn't a cheerful sound. "Well," she said, "at least you're honest." A chair scraped across the floor. "Sit down, both of you." Grace lowered herself carefully. "Now," Margaret continued, "start from the beginning." And so they did. Grace finished speaking. The small shop fell completely silent. She could hear the soft ticking of a clock somewhere on the wall, and the faint scrape of Margaret Hale's chair as the woman leaned back. For a long moment, Margaret said nothing. Then she poured herself a cup of coffee. The liquid splashed slowly into a mug. "So," Margaret said finally, her voice thoughtful, "Marcus Wilder murdered a man, and you're the only one who heard it." "There was someone else," Grace said. Margaret paused. "Someone else?" "A woman upstairs," Grace explained. "One of the girls who works in the saloon." Wyatt leaned forward. "You sure?" "Yes." Grace nodded. "I heard her gasp when Miller fell." Margaret set her cup down harder than necessary. "Those girls won't talk." "Why not?" Wyatt asked. "You know why," Margaret replied. "Wilder owns them." Grace lowered her head. "They're too scared." "Fear changes," Wyatt said. "Sometimes," Margaret sighed. "You don't understand the man you're dealing with." She folded her arms. "Wilder owns half this town. The sheriff owes him money. The judge drinks at his saloon every single night." Grace felt the weight of those words settle over her. "Then what do we do?" she asked quietly. "Run," Margaret answered. The word hung in the air. "Leave Dodge City. Disappear. Go somewhere Wilder can't reach you." "That's not an option," Wyatt said firmly. Margaret snorted. "It's the only smart option." Grace lifted her chin. "I'm not asking Wyatt to protect me," she said. Both of them turned toward her. "I'm asking him to help me fight." Margaret studied her in silence. Grace could feel the woman's eyes measuring her. Finally, Margaret spoke. "You've got steel in you, girl." She pushed her chair back. "I'll give you that." Grace waited. "Will you help us?" she asked. Margaret sighed deeply. "There's a preacher in town," she said. "Name's Samuel Reed." "What about him?" Wyatt asked. "He runs a small church at the south edge of Dodge." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "He's been helping people escape Wilder's reach for years." Grace leaned forward. "Can we trust him?" Margaret answered without hesitation. "He's the only man in this town Wilder hasn't been able to buy or break." Wyatt nodded slowly. "Then we talk to him." Margaret walked across the shop. "I'll send word," she said. "Tell him to meet you tonight." "Where?" Wyatt asked. "The old mill outside town." Grace heard the door creak as Margaret opened it. "After dark?" Grace stood. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Margaret said. Her voice grew serious. "The road you're walking only ends two ways." Grace waited. "Either Wilder ends up in the ground." Margaret paused. "Or you do." The door suddenly slammed open behind them. Cold air rushed into the shop. Grace heard heavy boots. "Well, well," a man drawled. Her stomach tightened. She recognized the voice immediately. Trent Doyle, Wilder's right-hand man. "Looks like the blind girl's been making friends," he said. Wyatt stood quickly. Grace heard the scrape of his chair. "Easy there, Carter," Doyle said with a chuckle. "I'm just delivering a message." "From Wilder?" Wyatt asked. "From Mr. Wilder," Doyle corrected. Margaret's voice cut in sharply. "Get out of my shop." Doyle ignored her. "Wilder says his offer still stands." Grace frowned. "What offer?" Doyle's boot stepped closer. "You come back with me," he said calmly, "and Wyatt Carter walks away free." Silence filled the room. "And if I refuse?" Grace asked. Doyle chuckled. "Then things get ugly." Margaret stepped forward. "I said get out." Doyle laughed again. "Fine." He turned toward the door. But remember what I said, Carter? His voice dropped colder. You've got until sundown tomorrow. The door slammed behind him. Grace felt her heart pounding. He knows we're here, she whispered. Wyatt's voice tightened. Then we don't stay. Margaret spoke quickly. Go to the mill. Wait for Samuel Reed. Grace swallowed. And if Wilder finds us first? Wyatt answered without hesitation. Then we make sure he regrets it. Outside the shop, the wind carried the distant sound of horses moving through town. Grace knew it with certainty then. The clock had started ticking. Wyatt grabbed Grace's hand. Can you run? He asked. I can try. Then stay close. Margaret pulled open a narrow back door behind the shop. Go, she said quickly. Through the alley. There's a fence at the end with a loose board. Grace heard Wyatt nod. Thank you. Don't thank me, Margaret replied. Just stay alive. They stepped outside. Cold air bit into Grace's face as Wyatt guided her through the narrow alley. Left, he said quietly. She turned. Stepped down. Her boot hit uneven ground. Right. They moved fast, faster than Grace had ever walked in her life. At the end of the alley, Wyatt stopped. Fence, he said. Grace reached forward and her hands found rough wood. There's a gap, Wyatt said. Duck through. She squeezed between the boards, the wood scraping against her sleeves. Wyatt followed right behind her. When they reached the other side, he took her hand again. Keep moving. They ran across frozen ground until Grace's lungs were burning. Finally, Wyatt slowed. Where are we? She asked, breathless. Edge of town. Grace listened. Wind moved through nearby trees. There's a trail here, Wyatt said. Leads to the old mill. How far? Half a mile. Grace straightened. I can make it. I know you can. They walked quickly through the trees. The ground was uneven beneath Grace's boots. Frozen dirt and patches of old snow made every step uncertain. Twice she stumbled. Both times, Wyatt caught her. Eventually the air changed. Grace smelled damp wood and stale grain. We're here, Wyatt said quietly. The old mill creaked around them. Now what? Grace asked. Now we wait. They found a pile of old grain sacks inside the building. Grace sat down, pulling Wyatt's coat tight around her shoulders. The mill groaned softly in the wind. Wyatt? Yeah. What happens if the preacher doesn't come? He'll come. But what if he doesn't? Wyatt hesitated. Then we figure something else out. Grace hugged her knees. I'm scared. I know. Are you? A short pause. Yeah. Somehow that answer made her feel less alone. Time passed slowly. Grace lost track of how long they sat there, listening to the wind move through the broken millboards. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate. Wyatt stood instantly. Who's there? A friend. The voice was deep, calm. Grace heard boots stepping carefully over loose wood. Margaret Hale sent me, the man continued. Wyatt relaxed slightly. Samuel Reed? The same. The footsteps stopped nearby. And you must be Wyatt Carter, the man said. Depends who's asking. Samuel chuckled softly. I've heard stories about you. Good ones, I hope. Complicated ones. Samuel turned slightly toward Grace. And this must be the young woman Wilder is so eager to find. Grace, she said quietly. Grace Holloway. Miss Holloway, Samuel replied warmly. He stepped closer. Grace could feel his presence, steady and calm. Margaret tells me you witnessed something you shouldn't have. I heard it, Grace corrected. I didn't see anything. Samuel's voice softened. Sometimes ears are more honest than eyes. He waited. Tell me what you know. Grace told the story again. Every detail, every sound, every word Wilder had spoken that night. When she finished, the mill fell silent. Finally, Samuel spoke. Clarence Miller may have been a drunk, he said, but he didn't deserve to die. No, Wyatt said. And Marcus Wilder doesn't deserve to keep walking free. Grace held her breath. Can you help us? Wyatt asked. Samuel sighed slowly. I can try. Grace frowned. That doesn't sound very hopeful. Samuel's voice grew serious. You need to understand something first. The wind whistled through the broken boards above them. Marcus Wilder isn't just a greedy businessman. He paused. He's connected. Grace felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Connected how? Railroad men, politicians, judges. Samuel's voice lowered. People with real power. Grace swallowed. So this is hopeless. No, Samuel said firmly. Just difficult. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. I've seen impossible things happen. Grace listened carefully. What kind of impossible things? Samuel's voice softened. Freedom. The word echoed quietly inside the empty mill. And I've learned something over all my years, he continued. What's that? Wyatt asked. Samuel's answer came calm and certain. The only thing stronger than money and guns, he paused, is the truth. Grace sat very still on the old grain sacks. The truth? She asked quietly. Samuel nodded. Yes. But Wilder controls the town, she said. He controls the law. Some of it, Samuel replied. Not all of it. Wyatt stepped closer. What are you thinking? Samuel lowered his voice. There's another witness. Grace straightened. The girl upstairs. Yes. Grace felt her heart quicken. You know who she is? I do, Samuel said. Her name is Lily Bennett, one of the women working at Wilder's saloon. Grace frowned. Will she talk? Samuel hesitated. She's been passing me information for months. Information? Wyatt asked. Names, Samuel said. Deals. Threats. Things Wilder assumes no one knows. Grace leaned forward. Can you reach her? I can try. How long will it take? Samuel sighed. A day, maybe 2. Grace shook her head. We don't have 2 days. Wyatt nodded grimly. Wilder's man gave us until tomorrow. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then we move fast. Grace felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean? You stay here tonight, Samuel said. Hidden. And you? Wyatt asked. I go back into town. Grace turned toward him. That's dangerous. Samuel chuckled softly. Most worthwhile things are. What if Wilder finds you? Grace asked. Then I pray I'm faster than he is. The preacher moved toward the mill door. I'll return before dawn, he said. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Grace spoke again before he stepped outside. Samuel. He stopped. Yes, Miss Holloway? Why are you helping us? There was a long pause. When Samuel finally spoke, his voice had changed. It carried weight. Because I spent the first 30 years of my life in chains. Grace's breath caught. And when I finally gained my freedom, he continued. I swore I would spend the rest of my days helping others find theirs. The mill door creaked open. Cold air rushed inside. Wilder thinks he owns this town, Samuel said quietly. Then the door shut behind him. Tomorrow. We remind him he doesn't. Silence filled the mill again. Grace hugged Wyatt's coat around herself. How long do we wait? She asked. Until morning. Wyatt settled in beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Grace whispered, Wyatt? Yeah. What happens after this? If we win? Yes. He shifted beside her. I don't know. Will you go back to your cabin? Maybe. Grace hesitated. Alone? Wyatt didn't answer right away. That depends, he said. On what? He turned toward her. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his eyes on her. On whether there's a reason to stay somewhere else. Grace's heart skipped. What kind of reason? Wyatt's voice softened. The kind that makes a man want to wake up in the morning. Grace slowly reached out in the darkness. Her fingers found his hand. He didn't pull away. I haven't had one of those in a long time, she whispered. Neither have I. The silence between them shifted. It felt warmer, fragile, new. Then, footsteps outside, fast. Wyatt stood instantly. Behind the barrels, he whispered. Grace scrambled back across the floor. Her hands found rough wood. She pressed herself against it and tried not to breathe. The mill door burst open. Wyatt. A woman's voice, breathless, terrified. Grace recognized it instantly. Margaret? Yes. Margaret's voice shook. You have to run. Grace's heart slammed against her ribs. Who? Wilder's men. Margaret rushed inside. A dozen of them, maybe more. Wyatt's voice turned sharp. How far away? Minutes. Grace felt the room grow colder. They're coming right now. Outside the mill, horses thundered closer. Men shouted. Another rifle cracked through the night. The gunshot echoed through the mill like thunder trapped inside a barrel. Grace pressed herself against the boards behind the barrels, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. Outside, horses thundered closer. Men shouted. Another rifle cracked through the darkness. Wyatt grabbed her arm. Stay behind me, he whispered. There's no back door, Margaret said quickly. I checked when I came in. Wyatt dragged something heavy across the floor. Wood scraped loudly. Here, he said. There's a gap in the wall boards. It leads down to the creek bed. Margaret moved first. I'll check outside. Wait! Wyatt started, but she was already squeezing through the narrow opening. Grace heard the thud of her boots hitting frozen ground, then silence. Margaret, Wyatt called softly. Nothing. Margaret. A scream split the night, short, sharp. Then it was gone. Grace's blood turned to ice. Wyatt pulled her closer. Don't move, he whispered. Don't make a sound. Boots approached the mill. Slow. Confident. Carter! A voice shouted. Grace knew that voice. Trent Doyle. We know you're in there. The mill door creaked open. Come out nice and easy, Doyle called. And maybe the blind girl makes it through the night. Wyatt said nothing. We've got your friend, Doyle continued. The dress shop lady. Grace gasped quietly. She's bleeding bad, Doyle added, but she might survive, if you cooperate. Grace grabbed Wyatt's sleeve. We have to help her. It's a trap, he whispered. I know. Her voice shook. But we can't let her die. If we go out there, Wyatt said, we all die. Grace swallowed hard. Then what do we do? Wyatt's hand found her face in the darkness. Do you trust me? Yes. Then stay here. Her chest tightened. No matter what happens, don't move. Wyatt, promise me. Grace forced the word out. I promise. He stepped away. His boots moved slowly toward the front of the mill. I'm coming out, Wyatt called. Outside, Doyle laughed. Smart man. Grace heard the mill door open again. Cold wind rushed through the building. Hands where I can see them, Doyle ordered. Then footsteps. Several men entering the mill. Grace held her breath. One of them walked so close she could smell tobacco and sweat on his coat. Search the place, Doyle said. Boots shuffled through the mill. Barrels rolled. Old sacks were kicked aside. Grace pressed her back flat against the wall. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't exist. Nothing here, a man called. Check again, Doyle snapped. We did. More footsteps. She ain't here, Doyle cursed loudly. Fine, bring him. Grace felt her stomach twist. Mr. Wilder wants a word with Carter. What about the dress shop woman? Another man asked. Leave her, Doyle said coldly. She'll bleed out before morning. The words hit Grace like a blade. Moments later, the men began leaving. Boots thudded across the floor. The door slammed shut. Outside, horses moved. Reins snapped. Hooves thundered away into the night. Silence returned slowly. Grace waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Then she moved, carefully. She crawled toward the broken boards in the wall. Splinters tore at her palms as she squeezed through the gap. Cold air struck her face like a blade. Margaret, she called softly. No answer. Margaret. A faint groan came from somewhere nearby. Grace turned toward the sound. Her hands reached out through the darkness. Finally, her fingers touched fabric. Wet fabric. Margaret. The woman's breathing was shallow. Girl, Margaret whispered weakly. You need to run. Grace shook her head. I'm not leaving you. You're stubborn, Margaret muttered. Grace pressed her hands against the wound. Where are you hurt? Shoulder, Margaret said. Bullet went clean through. We need to get you help. There's no help here. Margaret grabbed Grace's wrist. Listen to me. Grace leaned closer. Find Samuel Reed, Margaret whispered. He'll know what to do. Where? The church. South end of town. Grace felt tears run down her cheeks. I can't leave you. Margaret's grip tightened. That man gave himself up for you, she said. Don't waste it. Grace swallowed. The cold wind howled across the empty creek bed, and somewhere far down the road, Marcus Wilder was waiting. Grace didn't keep track of how long she walked. The cold cut through Wyatt's coat. Snow crunched beneath her boots. Her hands trembled with exhaustion, but she kept moving. One step, then another. Margaret's words echoed in her mind. Find Samuel. The town slowly came alive around her as morning crept across the plains. Wagons rattled along the streets. Horses stamped in the cold. Grace followed the sounds. Then she heard it, a voice low and gentle, singing a hymn. She turned toward it. Her boots hit wooden steps as she reached a small building. The church. Grace pushed the door open. Warm air greeted her. The singing stopped. Who's there? A man called. My name is Grace, she said, breathless. Grace Holloway. Footsteps rushed toward her. Miss Holloway? Samuel. Yes. Relief flooded his voice. Thank God you made it. Grace grabbed his sleeve. They took Wyatt. Samuel stiffened. Wilder's men, she continued. They have him. Samuel exhaled slowly. I feared that might happen. Grace frowned. You knew? I saw them riding through town. Samuel guided her toward a chair. Sit down. I can't sit, Grace said. We have to help him. We will. Grace heard several other voices in the room. Who else is here? She asked. People hiding from Wilder, Samuel explained. Farmers, miners, a few of the girls from the saloon. Grace straightened. Girls from the saloon? Yes. Samuel paused. And one of them is the woman you heard that night. Grace's heart jumped. The other witness. Samuel nodded. Her name is Lily Bennett. Soft footsteps approached. A young woman stopped close by. Are you the blind girl? She asked nervously. Yes, Grace said. I'm Lily. Grace reached out carefully. Lily's hand met hers. It was trembling. I heard what happened that night, Lily whispered. Just like you. Grace squeezed her hand. Then we can stop him. Lily hesitated. You don't understand, she said. Wilder knows my family. If I testify, he'll hurt them. Grace felt the fear woven through her voice. I was scared too, Grace said quietly. What changed? Grace thought about Wyatt standing in the snow beside that auction block, the way he had untied her hands. He treated me like I mattered, she said. Her voice grew stronger. And once someone shows you that, it's hard to go back to living afraid. Silence filled the room. Then Lily spoke again. What do you need me to do? Samuel stepped closer. There's a federal marshal riding into town today, he said. He's been investigating Wilder for months. Grace frowned. Will he believe us? With 2 witnesses and the right proof, Samuel said. He will. Grace felt hope rising again. But Wyatt, she said. Wilder has him. Samuel's voice hardened. Then we get him back. How? Grace asked. Samuel answered calmly. By bringing the truth straight to Wilder's door. Grace stood slowly. You mean the saloon? Yes. Lily's breath caught. That's suicide. Samuel shook his head. No. He rested a steady hand on Grace's shoulder. It's justice. Outside the church, the town continued waking up. But inside that small room, a different kind of storm was quietly beginning. One that Marcus Wilder never saw coming. The saloon sounded different that night. Grace could hear it before they even reached the door. Music, laughter, the clink of glasses. Marcus Wilder was celebrating. He thought he had already won. Samuel stopped the group in the alley behind the building. "Listen carefully," he said. Grace stood beside him, Lily on her other side. "We go through the kitchen entrance," Samuel continued. "Lily knows the way." "And the guards?" someone whispered. "I'll handle them," Samuel replied calmly. "When you hear 3 knocks on the back door, move fast." Grace swallowed. "Wyatt?" she asked. "He'll be upstairs," Lily said quietly. "Wilder keeps prisoners in his office." Samuel's voice turned firm. "When we move together." A moment of silence passed. Then, 3 sharp knocks. The door creaked open. "Now," Samuel said. They rushed inside. The kitchen exploded into chaos. Pots crashed to the floor. Someone shouted. Chairs scraped across wood. Grace followed Lily's hand through the noise. "Stairs," Lily whispered. They climbed quickly. 12 steps, then 12 more. A door slammed open above them. "Well, well." Grace froze. Wilder's voice, smooth, amused. "Look who came to visit." Lily's hand tightened around Grace's. "It's over, Wilder," she said. He laughed. "You think so?" "We have the confession," Lily continued. "Everything you've done, your brother's drunken scribbles." Wilder scoffed. "No court will believe that." Footsteps moved closer. Grace heard the slow, deliberate tap of his boots across the floor. "You know what I think?" Wilder said. "What?" Lily demanded. "I think you've forgotten who owns this town. You don't own me." Wilder's voice dropped colder. "Then let me remind you." A gunshot exploded. Grace dropped to the floor instinctively. "That was a warning," Wilder said calmly. "Next one won't be." Another voice cut through the room. "Put the gun down." "Samuel." Wilder laughed again. "You really think you can stop me, preacher? I believe the truth already has." Then, more boots pounding up the stairs. Voices shouted, "Federal Marshal, drop your weapons." The room erupted in confusion. Wilder cursed. "You did this?" he snarled. Grace stood slowly. "I didn't do anything," she said. Her voice was steady now. "You did it yourself." "You're blind," Wilder snapped. "You saw nothing." Grace lifted her chin. "No." She took 1 step forward. "But I heard everything." The room went silent. "And so did Lily," Grace continued. "And so did half the people you thought were too afraid to speak." More officers rushed into the room. Hands grabbed Wilder. He struggled and cursed as they dragged him away. "This isn't over!" he shouted. But no one was listening anymore. Grace turned toward the sound she had been waiting for. Wyatt. Heavy boots crossed the room. Then his arms wrapped around her, strong, warm, alive. "You came for me," he said softly. "You came for me first," she replied. He held her tighter. Outside, a crowd had gathered, people cheering in the streets. Inside the saloon, the marshal was reading Wilder his charges, but Grace barely heard any of it. All she heard was Wyatt's heartbeat against her chest. For the first time in her life, it sounded like home. Months later, the snow melted from the hills outside Wyatt's cabin. Grace stood on the porch, listening to birds singing in the trees. The wind moved softly through the grass. Behind her, the door opened. She knew Wyatt's footsteps anywhere now. "You're going to freeze out here," he said. "I'm fine." He draped his coat over her shoulders anyway. "Still thinking about that day?" he asked. "The auction?" Grace nodded. "Yes." Wyatt squeezed her hand. "I remember." Grace smiled softly. "You didn't just save me that day," she said. "What do you mean?" "You saved yourself too." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "We were both lost," Grace continued, "until we found each other." He pulled her gently into his arms. "I guess we were." Grace rested her head against his chest. "I love you, Wyatt Carter." His voice came out rough when he answered. "I love you too." The wind carried their laughter across the hills, and the girl who had once been sold for $1 finally had a home.